Welcome to Dreamer's Realm. I invite you to join me for a handful of tender stories drawn from ordinary days. May these quiet moments bring a smile to your soul or gently guide you into restful sleep. So get cozy, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Story 1. Where We Found Lucky, a love story from a roadside in Victoria, Australia. It was one of those dry, sleepy afternoons in late February when the sun lingered longer than it should have over the hills of Daylesford. Eli had been driving from Melbourne to visit his uncle's old cottage, a plan he had postponed too many weekends in a row. The road shimmered under the sun and the air was thick with eucalyptus and dust. He stopped at a small petrol station just off the Midland Highway. It was one of those half-forgotten fuel stops. A single pump, an old red Coca-Cola sign faded by the years, and a weathered wooden bench beneath a creaking awning. Eli stepped out, stretching his back and rubbing the dust off his sunglasses. That's when he noticed her, a young woman, crouched beside a white ute, her arms stretched beneath the vehicle, mumbling something he couldn't hear. From where he stood, all he saw was a ponytail swaying and dusty jeans streaked at the knees. He hesitated, then approached. "Need a hand?" She looked up, her face streaked with sweat and determination. "There's a kitten stuck under the car. I think it's scared stiff." Eli crouched down beside her. "Kitten?" She pointed, and sure enough, under the belly of the ute was a tiny ginger ball with eyes as wide as moons. "How long's he been there?" "I don't know. I just pulled over to grab a bottle of water, and I heard this tiny meow. I can't leave him here." They tried everything. Tuna from a sandwich she had in her cooler, gentle coaxing, even soft whistling. The kitten just huddled farther back into the shadows, eyes flicking between them like it didn't trust the world. "Do you have a towel?" Eli asked. She ran to her passenger seat and came back with a green beach towel. Sandy and soft, Eli lay on his stomach, inching forward, speaking low. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. I won't hurt you. Come here." It took 10 minutes, several scratches, and a very dusty shirt. But Eli finally pulled the trembling kitten into the light, and in that moment, under the faded awning of a roadside petrol station, something clicked. They placed the kitten in a cardboard box lined with the towel and drove. In her car, with Eli navigating to the Daylesford vet clinic. On the drive over, she finally told him her name, Clara. "I'm a veterinary nurse," she said, glancing over at him. "But on my day off, of course, I find a cat." Eli smiled. "Maybe the cat found you." Clara looked at him for a second longer than necessary. "Maybe." Lucky, as he was later named, weighed less than a bag of sugar and had a heart murmur so soft only trained fingers could find it. He was dehydrated, underfed, and feisty as hell. They both stayed with him that afternoon, watching from the hallway as the vet worked, both sipping instant coffee from a cracked mug with the clinic's logo on it. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I kind of did," Eli replied. "He scratched the hell out of me. I think that makes me part owner." She laughed. "It's settled then, shared custody." That evening, after Lucky was stable and snoozing in a small heated crate, they sat outside the clinic. The sky was turning violet, and kookaburras were chuckling somewhere in the trees. "So," Clara said, breaking the quiet, "what do we do now?" "I guess we co-parent." Eli grinned. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "You know, I never thought my next relationship would begin with a cat." "Same," he said, "but maybe that's how the best ones start." And so it did. They exchanged numbers, not out of politeness, but with genuine excitement. The next week, Clara sent Eli a photo of Lucky curled up in a teacup. He replied with a hand-drawn doodle of the three of them labeled "The Unlikely Family." A few days later, he visited the clinic again, then another day, then a Sunday picnic in the park with Lucky snoozing in a travel bag between them. Conversations stretched into hours. Eli learned Clara had grown up in Castlemaine, had 2 brothers, and once dyed her hair blue for a whole summer. Clara learned Eli had once lived in Japan for a year, played guitar in a band that never left his garage, and always carried a sketchbook in his satchel. They talked about films, music, lost dreams, and fresh hopes. They fought, too, once about whether Lucky should be allowed on the kitchen counter. Clara said yes. Eli was undecided, but somehow, even the arguments felt like a thread weaving something stronger. Months passed. Lucky grew stronger, his fur glossy and golden. He had a strange habit of sleeping upside down, and a fierce loyalty to Clara's sock drawer. Eli and Clara had begun referring to each other's places as home. One morning, as they brushed their teeth side by side, Clara mumbled through the phone, "He needs a cat tree." Eli, still half asleep, replied, "I'll build him one." That afternoon, he did. 1 year after the day they met, they returned to the same fuel station on purpose. The Coca-Cola sign was still faded, the awning still creaked, and the old wooden bench still sat waiting. This time, there were 3 of them, Lucky on a leash, sniffing at gravel. "I still think he chose us," Clara said. Eli looked at her, the sun casting light over the freckles on her nose. "Yeah," he replied, "and I think he got it right." And in the quiet countryside of Victoria, in a house with a porch wrapped in vines and an orange cat that ruled the living room, love, soft, steady, and beautifully unexpected, curled up and stayed. Story 2, The Loaf of Kindness. a heartwarming tale from a small town in Canada. In the small coastal town of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, where the ocean breeze mingled with the scent of pine and salt, there was a tiny bakery nestled between a bookshop and a florist. It was called Maisie's Oven, a name painted in soft blue cursive on a wooden sign that creaked slightly when the wind came down from the harbor. The bakery was easy to miss if you were walking fast, but nobody walked fast in Lunenburg. People there had the kind of rhythm that allowed you to stop and talk about the weather, or admire the way the sunlight hit the red shingles of the fishing boats. Life wasn't perfect, but it was gentle. Maisie, the woman behind the bakery, had silver-threaded hair usually tied back with a faded floral scarf. She wore aprons with flower-stained pockets and hummed old Irish tunes while kneading dough. At 67, she still woke before dawn, turning on the lights of her cozy shop while most of the town was still dreaming. The warmth from the ovens pushed against the chill of early mornings, and the scent of rising bread often brought early walkers to her doorstep. But what made Maisie's Oven truly unforgettable wasn't just the buttery croissants or her legendary maple scones. It was the small sign that sat in the front window. If you're going through a hard time, please take a loaf and have a good day. If you'd like to leave something, the little wooden box is by the door. You decide. No explanation, no judgment, just a quiet offering. At first, a few passers-by would take a hesitant glance. Some assumed it was a clever marketing gimmick, or perhaps a kind of tourist attraction, but those who lived in Lunenburg knew better. It was exactly what it looked like, a gift from someone who understood that sometimes all you need to get through a hard day is a warm piece of bread and the knowledge that someone cares. Maisie never advertised. She didn't need to. One November morning, a boy named Theo wandered into the shop. He couldn't have been more than 11, with a blue knit hat that drooped over one eye and shoes a size too small. He stood near the counter, not quite stepping forward. Maisie looked up from icing a batch of cinnamon rolls. "Morning, love," she said gently. "Chilly out there today." Theo didn't say much, just nodded. He kept glancing at the bread rack. "You go on and pick one," Maisie said, wiping her hands on her apron. Fresh from the oven, still warm. The boy looked unsure, so she added, "It's all right, sweetheart, no charge." He walked over slowly, fingers brushing against the loaves. He picked a round one with sesame seeds and clutched it to his chest like a treasure. As he turned to go, he paused beside the little wooden box. After a moment, he reached into his coat pocket and placed something inside. A folded note, written in pencil on lined school paper. Later that day, after cleaning up, Maisie opened the box. Inside was the boy's note. "Thank you. My mom and I didn't have anything for breakfast. This bread smells like the one she used to make when we were happy. I hope I can help bake someday." Maisie folded the note and pressed it to her heart. Word spread, as it always does in small towns. People began stopping by not just for pastries, but to leave little envelopes in the box. A few dropped off bags of flour or jars of honey. Someone even left a bag of cinnamon with a ribbon tied around it. But every time someone offered money directly, Maisie smiled and shook her head. "If you want to help," she'd say, "come knead some dough with me." And they did. Saturdays became baking days, with neighbors popping in to shape rolls or frost cupcakes. Retired teachers, high school kids, a fisherman named Louis with calloused hands but the gentlest touch when rolling out pastry. Everyone found a place at Maisie's oven. She taught them slowly, patiently. "Bread," she would say, "needs to be treated like an old friend. You don't rush it, you just stay with it." There was laughter, flower fights, quiet confessions over cups of tea, and sometimes tears, because some people arrived with heavy hearts, and the smell of bread rising had a way of unlocking memories. One snowy evening in February, the power went out across town. The storm had taken down a transformer. Most shops shut their doors early, but Maisie stayed. She lit candles, opened her doors, and began distributing still warm loaves to people passing by in the dark. Children came in with cold cheeks, clutching their parents' hands. Lonely elders who hadn't spoken to anyone all day found themselves sitting with strangers, sharing stories over muffins and hot cocoa made on a gas stove. The bakery glowed like a lantern in the snow. That night, Lunenburg wasn't just a town. It was a kitchen. It was family. Years passed. Theo grew up. He became tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm voice and a warm laugh. He apprenticed under Maisie, eventually learning every recipe by heart. She gave him a key to the shop on his 18th birthday. "I'm not going to be around forever," she said, sipping her tea. "But bread doesn't end with the baker. It keeps going." When Maisie retired, she didn't sell the shop. She gave it to Theo. "I trust you to keep the oven warm," she told him, and the sign by the window. And he did. Today, if you walk through Lunenburg and find your way to the quiet street with the blue door, you'll still see the sign in the window. The wooden box is there too, a little more worn, its corners softened by time. Inside are coins, folded notes, and sometimes small drawings from children. Theo still bakes before dawn. He still gives away bread. And sometimes, if you stop in late in the day, you'll find Maisie in the back, humming an old tune, helping decorate cupcakes or sweeping the flour-dusted floor. Some say the world is getting colder, harder, but in a tiny bakery on the edge of the Atlantic, there is still a warm loaf waiting for anyone who needs it. No questions, no judgment, just kindness, baked fresh each morning. Story 3, Ding Ding Days. In the lakeside town of Naantali, Finland, where the summers were soft and the winters snowy enough to hush the streets, there lived an old man named Vekko. He was 78 years old, and every morning, without fail, he climbed onto his battered green bicycle with a wicker basket up front and a bright yellow raincoat wrapped around his frame. Even when there was no rain, the bicycle had seen better days. The chain creaked in protest whenever he pedaled uphill. The tires were slightly mismatched, and the bell had gone missing a few years back. Rather than replace it, Vekko had found a different solution. Every time he needed to alert a pedestrian or make a turn, he'd shout cheerfully, "Kang Kang." It was silly, it was a little loud, but people began to smile when they heard that familiar "Kang Kang" echoing down the cobbled streets. Children waved, dogs barked, and even the grumpiest joggers lifted their heads when Vekko came rolling by. What made it even better was the sight of the little bouquet of fresh wildflowers he always placed in the basket. Some days it was a handful of daisies. Other days, little blue forget-me-nots or pink carnations wrapped in paper. People assumed he picked them up from the corner market, which was partly true, but he always asked the florist to wrap them gently, for someone who might forget they're hers. Vekko was the last newspaper delivery man in town, not because there were no others, but because no one else believed it mattered anymore. Most households in Naantali had long switched to reading the news online, tapping and scrolling instead of unfolding pages, but there remained a handful of loyal subscribers, mostly elderly, a few romantic types, and one young woman who said she just loved the smell of ink on newsprint. For them, the sound of a rolled-up paper landing gently at their doorstep each morning was more than news. It was comfort. Vekko never rushed his rounds. He delivered with care, often leaving the papers in special spots requested by his readers, tucked behind a flower pot, placed beneath a ceramic hedgehog, or left next to the morning milk. He learned these habits the way he learned to fold the corners of his wife's favorite crossword. Gently, with attention, because everything Vekko did was, in some way, still for her. Her name was Helena. She had once been a librarian, quiet and kind, with long gray hair always tied back with a velvet ribbon. She loved warm socks, tomato soup, and swans. For over 50 years, she had been Vekko's wife, his best friend, and the only person who could beat him at Finnish Scrabble. But in the past few years, Helena's memory had begun to dim. It started with small things, the name of a neighbor, a misplaced key, but slowly, more pieces slipped away. There were mornings when she looked at Vekko and blinked, unsure of who he was, and then moments later, she would smile and call him "my darling," the same way she did when they were 20. Vekko never corrected her. He only smiled and said, I'm just here for the walk. Love. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock sharp, no matter the season, they walked together to the little park by the lake. Vecco would hold Helena's hand in his, calloused and warm, and they would stroll slowly along the gravel path that curved beneath the trees. Sometimes Helena would tell stories, some from her childhood, some completely imagined. Sometimes she would forget mid-sentence, and they would laugh. At the far end of the park was a wooden bench. That was their bench. Vecco always brought a thermos of coffee and 2 cinnamon buns from a bakery downtown. They sat in silence or spoke about the ducks or the weather. Occasionally, Helena would place a hand on her lap and look at him. "Have we met before?" she'd ask. Vecco would grin. "Yes, a very long time ago." She'd tilt her head and study him. "Did we like each other?" "We still do," he'd say. And sometimes, when the sunlight filtered just right through the birch trees, she would kiss his cheek and say, "You have a kind face." He never stopped bringing her flowers. Every morning after delivering his newspapers, he would stop by the market. He would always buy just one thing, a small bouquet. He never told the florist the whole story, but she knew. Everyone in town did. Eventually, once, on a bright June morning, a small child ran up to Vecco as he passed by. "Why do you shout 'Keng Keng' instead of using a bell?" she asked with wide eyes. Vecco leaned down with a twinkle in his gaze. "Because I'm old, and my voice works better than my bike," he said. "Besides, it makes people smile." That answer delighted her so much she began shouting "Keng Keng" all the way home. One Wednesday, a woman at the bakery where he bought his cinnamon buns quietly left 2 extra in his paper bag. She said it was a thank you for being the morning sunshine of this town. Another day, the florist tied a little card to the bouquet, "For you and your forget-me-not queen." Vecco kept these tokens in a tin box by the fireplace. He didn't talk about them, but sometimes, on quiet nights when Helena had gone to sleep early, he'd open the box and hold each one with the same tenderness he used to hold her hand when they danced at summer weddings. As summer faded into early autumn, the air grew crisp and the lake shimmered under softer light. Vecco began adding a blanket to the basket for their park visits. He would wrap it around Helena's legs as they sat, and she would sometimes doze off on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. One evening, as they watched the golden leaves drift from the trees, Helena turned to him and asked, "Are we in love?" Vecco chuckled, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "We've been in love for so long. I think even the ducks know." She giggled. "Good, I like you." There were hard days, of course. Days when she refused to get out of bed. Days when she cried without knowing why. But Vecco never raised his voice. He only held her closer. When she forgot her name, he whispered it softly like a prayer. And when she forgot his, he'd say, I'll remind you every day, if I must. In the town of Nontali, life moved slowly, but for those who noticed, every cobblestone had a story, and every alley corner held echoes of laughter, sorrow, and love. Vako was part of those echoes. Keng Keng, he'd shout, still pedaling his creaky bicycle each morning, and the people would smile, because in a world that often moved too fast and forgot too much, there was an old man with a bicycle, a basket of flowers, and a voice that rang like a bell, reminding everyone that love, like memory, may fade and flicker, but never truly disappears. Story 4: Fingertips and Fantasies. There are certain sounds that leave fingerprints on your memory, even long after the echoes fade. For Jamie Ellis, the very first sound that did that was not a voice or a bell or even birdsong. It was music, floating gently from a glossy black piano placed in the open foyer of a shopping center in Leeds. He was 10 years old, a Wednesday afternoon, waiting for his mom to buy him socks, of all things. And there, by sheer accident or destiny, he found himself drawn to the circle of people gathered around a stranger tapping out a melody on a public piano. It wasn't a song Jamie knew. It wasn't even structured. The man, older, scruffy beard, long fingers, was improvising, letting his hands chase one another like clouds in motion. Some notes stumbled, others soared, but it was beautiful, beautiful in a way Jamie couldn't explain. Like the man was speaking in a language that didn't need words. Jamie stood frozen, heart thudding to a rhythm he didn't understand. That night, he asked his mom if they could go back the next day. A week later, Jamie was in the hospital. What started as a high fever turned into a string of tests and strange conversations whispered in hallways. "You're very brave," said the nurse, placing a cool hand on his forehead. Jamie didn't feel brave. He felt confused, tired, and then, one morning, when the sun was barely rising, he blinked and couldn't see. The world had gone foggy and dim. Then, within days, completely dark. The doctors gave it a name: autoimmune retinopathy. Irreversible. They spoke gently, slowly, as if sugar coating could dull the sharp edge of such news. But Jamie's world didn't crumble the way they thought. It just shifted. The colors were gone, but his ears began hearing everything. Every footstep, every sigh, every distant dog bark, every whisper of wind. The world had gone silent in one way, but unbearably rich in another. At home, things were different. His bedroom was rearranged, corners softened, objects labeled in Braille. His mother's voice became his compass, her footsteps a lullaby of reassurance. But something inside Jamie stirred. That sound from the shopping center, that piano, He couldn't see it anymore, but he remembered it perfectly. The way each note rose like sunlight on water. "I want to learn," he said one day, as his mom guided his fingers along the edge of the kitchen table. "Learn what, love?" "The piano." She paused and then smiled. "All right then." They found a teacher named Mr. Whitmore. He had once taught in schools, now semi-retired, teaching privately in his narrow terrace house lined with old clocks and even older books. Jamie was his first blind student. On the first day, Mr. Whitmore gently placed Jamie's hands on the keys. "It's not about sight," he said softly. "It's about touch. Listen to what your fingers tell you." At first, it was awkward. His hands fumbled. He mistook E for F. The chords felt like tangled shoelaces. But slowly, he began to feel it. The shape of a C major. The satisfying weight of a perfect fifth. He played scales over and over, fingers learning to speak a new language. It wasn't just notes, it was emotion. He could tell when he struck a sad chord, or when joy danced from a trill. His hearing sharpened, his memory stretched like elastic. His fingers remembered what his eyes could not. Years passed. Jamie didn't become a prodigy overnight. There were days he cried in frustration, days when the keys felt like strangers, but he never stopped. At 15, he performed his first piece in a school recital, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. His teacher had suggested something simpler, but Jamie insisted. He learned it not from sheets, but by heart, by shape, by repetition. When he played it in the echoey hall, not a single person breathed until the final note fell like a feather. Afterward, someone asked him, "How do you know when to press the pedal if you can't see your foot?" Jamie smiled. "I listen to the sound. The piano tells me." When Jamie turned 20, he entered a national music competition for young classical performers. He didn't tell the judges he was blind. He didn't need to. He played Chopin, then a piece of his own, a melody born one night when the rain hit the windows in soft intervals like a lullaby. He didn't win first place, but he was invited to speak, to share his story, and that changed everything. People began listening, not just to his music, but to the way he spoke about it, about resilience, about how dreams don't need eyes, just imagination, about the power of starting over in the dark. Jamie began touring, performing in halls he couldn't see but could feel through applause and silence. He met children who were blind, teens who felt broken, elderly folks who'd lost their will to play, and to each, he said, "Close your eyes, press a key, and listen, really listen. That's the sound of possibility." One winter, he returned to Leeds. The shopping center had changed a bit. New stores, brighter lights, but the piano was still there, now polished, with a small plaque, "Play me." Jamie sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and let them wander. He didn't announce himself, didn't say a word, but as he played, people gathered. Some cried. Jamie smiled. He couldn't see their faces, but he felt their stillness, their breathing, their awe. And in that moment, he wasn't the blind boy. He wasn't even the pianist. He was just a boy who once stood in that very spot, listening with wide eyes and a pounding heart. Proof that music, once it touches you, never lets go. Story 5, The Road of Quiet Pages. A story of books, mountains, and hope in Bhutan. In the eastern highlands of Bhutan, where the clouds linger low and the winding roads disappear into forests of pine and rhododendron, there lived a man named Dorji. He was a driver of no particular fame or fortune, but if you asked anyone in the small town of Trashigan, they'd smile and say, "Ah, yes, Dorji, the man with books in his car." Dorji's truck was old and faded blue, with a crack in the windshield and prayer flags tied to the mirror. He'd driven it for nearly 15 years up the steepest, loneliest roads in the region, mostly ferrying tourists to the breathtaking mountain viewpoints, and occasionally bringing supplies to villages perched so high the air was thinner, quieter, wiser. What made Dorji special wasn't how carefully he navigated the narrow roads or how kindly he treated every passenger. Though he did both, it was what he carried in the back seat. Books, wrapped in cloth, stacked in boxes, tucked between seat cushions, picture books, children's novels, old textbooks, and fairy tales with worn corners and fading covers. He collected them wherever he could. Some were donations from friends in the capital. Others were rescued from second-hand stalls in Thimphu or sent in packages by tourists who remembered him after returning home. Each time he made a trip up into the mountains, especially to the village of Lanana, far beyond the paved paths, he carried with him a small treasure trove of stories, not to read himself, but to give away. Lanana was a village you couldn't find on most maps. To reach it, you had to cross 3 rivers, pass under hanging cliffs, and climb a path that often vanished during the monsoon. Most outsiders never bothered, but Dorji knew the way, and more importantly, he knew the children. There were about 15 of them, barefoot and bright-eyed, their cheeks reddened by the cold and their laughs echoing through the hills like flutes. Only a few made it down the mountain to the government school during dry months. The rest stayed behind, helping parents herd yaks or carry firewood, growing up too quickly on stories told by moonlight. Dorji remembered the first time he handed a book to one of them. It was a dog-eared picture book, the Jungle Book, translated into Zonka. The boy held it like something holy. "But I can't read," he had whispered. "That's all right," Dorji said. "You can learn." And until then, you can touch the pages, look at the drawings, and imagine. And so began a tradition. Every few weeks, whenever he had a tourist group to drive or goods to deliver, Dorji would make time for a stop in Lanana. He'd sit with the children under the cypress tree by the prayer wheels, open a book, and read aloud in a soft voice, slowly letting the words rise into the cold air. Some days he'd bring paper and pencils, other days flashcards he made himself. He never lectured, he simply invited. If you can sound out the name of your village, he said once, you've already begun. The village elders appreciated him, though they rarely said much. They'd nod, offer him butter tea, and sometimes send him home with dried cheese and apples. But the children, they loved him. They waited for the sound of his truck like others waited for the call of morning birds. Soon, he began to leave books with them. Not many, just enough for 1 or 2 per household, wrapped in cloth to protect them from weather and curious goats. He taught the older children how to care for them, to pass them around gently, to use pebbles as bookmarks. They are your friends, he would say, not loud ones, but faithful. Years passed. Tourists came and went. Some asked about the books in his truck and listened, surprised as he told them his story. A few offered to help. They mailed him books from Japan, Canada, Norway. Once, a group of university students in Australia sent him a parcel with handwritten messages inside each cover. But Dorji never boasted. He never called it charity. It is just sharing, he said once, like giving a cup of tea. If you have it, you offer. He kept no records, no photos, just memories, and the quiet pride of watching a child point at a word and say it out loud for the first time. One winter, snow fell early. Dorji had planned a trip to Lanana but was warned against it. The road is too dangerous. Someone said, wait until spring, but he had promised the children he'd return before the year ended. He had saved a very special book for them, one about stars and sky maps, something he thought they'd love. So he went. The road was hard. The cold cut into his fingers. At one point, he had to stop and help a villager dig a sheep out of a snowdrift. But he made it. When he arrived, the children ran to greet him, slipping in the snow, their eyes shining. Did you bring it? They asked. Dorji smiled and held up the book. That night, the villagers lit a fire in the center of the square. Dorji read the book under the stars, tracing constellations with his fingers, telling them what ancient sailors believed, what the sky might say if it could speak. The children sat wrapped in blankets, heads tilted upward. One small girl whispered, I think the stars are listening. Dorji laughed. Maybe they are. Now, in his 60s, Dorji still drives the same truck, a little slower now, a little stiffer in the knees, but the books are still there, packed neatly in the back seat. Some of the children he once read to now teach their younger siblings. One became a teacher, another left for the capital, where he volunteers at a local library. Dorji still makes the drive, still shouts greetings out the window as he arrives, still reads under the cypress tree, still believes in the power of quiet pages. Because in a world where roads are steep and schools are far, a story, shared gently, read patiently, can be a bridge, and Dorji, with his old truck and soft eyes, continues to build that bridge, one book at a time. Story 6, Hoed After Midnight, a story of grit, grace, and quiet triumph in Korea. In a narrow alley of Incheon, lit by dim yellow lamps and the soft glow of vending machines, there lived a woman named Ji-yoon. She was 33, though the weight in her eyes made her look older. Her apartment was small, a single room with a sink, a foldable bed, and a second-hand laptop perched on a table by the window. The view wasn't much, just the wall of another building, but it was hers. 5 years ago, her husband had left. No warning, no note, just an absence that became permanent. Left behind were unpaid bills, a 6-month-old daughter, and Ji-yoon staring at the apartment door, too stunned to cry. She took jobs, any jobs, cleaning houses, washing dishes in small restaurants, folding laundry in hotel basements. Her hands cracked in winter and her back ached by night, but she kept moving. At first, she survived for her daughter, Soo-ah. Then, slowly, she began surviving for herself too. On her walks between jobs, she would pass an internet cafe, and sometimes, when Soo-ah was asleep at night, she would remember the windows full of glowing monitors and wonder what people were doing behind those screens. What kind of work didn't leave blisters on your palms? One night, after putting Soo-ah to bed and scrubbing the bathroom for the 3rd time that week, Ji-yoon typed something into her old phone. How to work online with no degree. The search led her down a rabbit hole, freelancing forums, YouTube videos, online boot camps, stories of people changing careers. The words that kept appearing were coding, software, and remote. Ji-yoon didn't understand most of it. She barely remembered high school math, but there was something thrilling in the idea of building something with her mind instead of her muscles. So, she made a promise to herself, just try for 30 days. She started with free tutorials, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. The letters and symbols looked like another language. At first, she copied everything line by line, not knowing what it meant. She watched videos at half speed, paused every few seconds, rewound when her mind fogged. She had a notebook with messy handwriting and dozens of pages labeled, "Why isn't this working?" She studied after midnight, when Suwa was asleep and the world was quiet. Some nights, she fell asleep with her hand on the mouse. Other nights, she made it to dawn. On Sundays, she let Suwa sit on her lap while she typed. She told her daughter, "Ioma is learning something new. Maybe one day you'll teach me." She failed often. She took an online quiz and scored 12%. She submitted a simple website for review and received harsh comments. She cried in the bathroom, not wanting Suwa to hear. But then she tried again and again until one day something clicked. Her code compiled. Her tiny project worked. She had made a working calculator with buttons and sound effects. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. After a year, she took on small freelance jobs, designing landing pages, fixing bugs, editing website layouts. Clients didn't know she was working between cleaning shifts, answering emails in subway stations, uploading code while rocking a child to sleep. Bit by bit, her confidence grew. Her English improved. Her typing got faster. Her questions on forums became clearer. She no longer felt like an outsider. She was becoming a developer. One winter morning, Ji-yoon applied to a coding bootcamp scholarship hosted by a major tech company in Seoul. She didn't expect to hear back. A month later, an email arrived. "Congratulations, you've been selected for the Women in Tech program." She stared at the screen for 5 minutes before whispering, "Is this real?" She called her mother to babysit for 3 months. She packed her only decent coat. She took a deep breath and went. The program was intense. There were deadlines, team projects, whiteboard interviews. She was the oldest in the room. She had the least formal education, but she had resilience. She had coded after midnight for 5 years. She stayed behind after class, asked for help, and offered help to others. She baked snacks and shared them. She learned the names of every person in the room, even the shy ones. At the end of the program, she stood in front of a panel of engineers and gave a presentation in English about an app she built for single mothers in low-income neighborhoods. The room clapped. The head engineer smiled. 2 weeks later, she received a job offer, a full-time role at a Seoul-based software firm. Good pay, health insurance, benefits. She stared at the screen again, this time with tears she didn't hide. She took Suwa to a bookstore and let her pick any book she wanted. They rode the train home, her daughter humming and Ji-yoon watching the city rush by, feeling something inside her shift. Not a finish line, but a beginning. Now, Ji-yoon works from home 3 days a week. Her desk is still near a window, though the view now includes a tree. Her hands still move constantly, typing, building, answering questions on developer forums. But she also writes blog posts. shares her journey, mentors younger women. Sometimes, when she works late, Suwa curls beside her and asks, "Ioma, what are you making?" Ji-yoon gives a peck on her cheek and says, "Our future, little sweetheart." Story 7, Saturdays at Livia's. A gentle story set in a quiet corner of Italy, where coffee, paintings, and unspoken feelings find their way home. The little door on Via Deglio Lmi, in a tucked-away alley in Bologna, where potted geraniums bloom like quiet bursts of joy and laundry lines still swing gently between old buildings. There stood a pale mint green door with no signboard above it. It wasn't always open, but every Saturday, without fail, the scent of ground arabica and freshly baked almond biscotti would drift out into the sleepy street. And the door would open. That door belonged to Livia Moretti, a soft-spoken woman of 34 with a mind full of colors and a heart that quietly beat to the rhythm of brush strokes. She had inherited the space from her grandmother, who once used it as a tailoring shop. Livia didn't sew, but she painted and made coffee, and so she gave it new life, transforming the tiny room into Café Livia, a place that only existed once a week. The cafe had only 4 tables, no background music, no rush, just a warm espresso machine, a rotating selection of her oil paintings on the wall, and a chalkboard that read in curly handwriting, "Only open on Saturdays." The rest of the week belongs to paint. The man who came every Saturday. The first time Marco Rinaldi walked past the alley, it was purely by chance. He was on his way to visit his aunt and had taken a shortcut. What stopped him wasn't the smell of coffee or curiosity. It was a painting in the window, a field of lavender under a sky bursting with stars. Something about it made him pause. That first Saturday, he entered shyly, ordered a macchiato, and sat at the corner table. Livia barely looked up as she poured his coffee. She had paint on her hands and wore a gray linen apron that made her look like she had just stepped out of a sunlit studio in Provence. Every Saturday after that, Marco returned. He brought a book each time, but his eyes often wandered to the paintings. Every week, a new one appeared on the wall. Themes shifted with the seasons: seaside mornings, sleeping cats, storms at dusk, little girls running with kites. Each painting came with a small card beside it. No title, just a short handwritten note. Some were poetic, others humorous. One simply said, "This is what I think Tuesday feels like." Marco began leaving short comments on scraps of paper, folding them neatly and slipping them beneath the sugar bowl before he left. He never signed them. Livia read them all. A gentle routine. The ritual became their own kind of rhythm. Livia never asked for his name. Marco never lingered too long. But each week, the room held a growing tension, not of discomfort, but of something tender and wordless blooming in silence. She noticed how he laughed quietly when reading her notes, how he tilted his head when examining brush strokes. She started painting with him in mind, unconsciously at first, a man reading under a tree, a coffee cup held by unknown hands, a street corner that looked suspiciously like his route to her cafe. And he began to write more. Your sky tonight feels like it's thinking about someone. Or, this field reminds me of the scent of her apron. He still didn't sign them, but she began to know him anyway. The week that changed everything. It was the 12th Saturday. Livia had just put the finishing touches on a painting of her grandmother's garden when Marco walked in. Not with a book this time, but with a small envelope. He ordered the usual, but his eyes held a nervous flicker. "Could you paint something for me?" he asked gently, sliding the envelope forward. Inside was a simple note. 4 words. "One lovely day of yours." She looked up. He smiled, a little sad. "Just something that feels like you. That's all." Livia didn't answer. She only nodded. Slowly, he left without his coffee half finished. Livia didn't sleep much that week. She sat by the window with her brushes and candles lit. She painted not a dream, not a landscape, not even a self-portrait. She painted the tiny cafe from her corner, the mint green door open, a coffee cup, a book resting on the edge, and at the center of it all, a man seated at the corner table, looking toward something off canvas with quiet, hopeful eyes. It was him, and that was her lovely day. The next Saturday, he arrived as usual, unsure of what he would find. But when he stepped inside, the painting was already on the wall. No card, no title, but it needed none. He stood still for a long time, then turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's me, Livia," behind the counter. Didn't look away this time. She smiled and replied simply, "I know." For the first time, Marco didn't leave a comment. He just smiled. Cafe Livia, Saturdays for anyone, Sundays for 2. He brought her pastries from a bakery near his flat. She painted while he read, sometimes in silence, sometimes not. There were no grand confessions, no fireworks, just warm drinks and warmer glances. But if you stood outside on a quiet Sunday morning and listened closely, you might hear her laugh, low and gentle, or his voice as he read aloud the dedication in her favorite book. And that little alley in Bologna, it never looked more alive. Thank you for spending time with us and listening to these little stories. Most people go searching for miracles in fairy tales, but often the most magical things are hidden in the tiniest corners of everyday life. We hope these stories have planted a small, bright seed in your heart, one that might grow into something beautiful and kind. If you enjoyed these quiet moments with us, don't forget to like and subscribe to Dreamer's Realm. We'll be waiting for you in the next video with more stories to whisper into your soul. See you again very soon.